Explosive sirens wail across the heart of Russia as Ukraine unleashes a barrage of strikes on Moscow and St. Petersburg in these very hours. Reports from multiple intelligence sources confirm the impacts, drones slicing through the night sky, targeting key infrastructure in the Russian capital and the northern powerhouse city. The world holds its breath, blasts echo in real time, with eyewitnesses describing chaos on the streets, emergency lights flashing amid shattered glass and rising smoke. This isn't a drill or a rumor, it's unfolding now, shaking the foundations of Putin's stronghold. Ukrainian forces, in a bold escalation, claim precision hits on military logistics hubs, sending shockwaves through the Kremlin. But why today? What triggered this daring penetration of Russian airspace? As the dust settles and alerts blare nationwide, one thing is clear: the rules of engagement have shattered. Stay with us on this channel, subscribe now to catch every twist as we dive deeper into the political fallout, military maneuvers, economic tremors, information battles, and the psychological unraveling that could redefine the conflict. This is just the spark, the fire is spreading fast. Official statements from the Kremlin pour in like a scripted defense, with President Putin convening an emergency session of the Security Council in these tense hours, vowing an unprecedented response to what he labels a terrorist incursion by Ukrainian aggressors. Spokesmen in Moscow declare the strikes a violation of international norms, demanding immediate condemnation from the United Nations and calling for sanctions against Kyiv's backers in the West. Yet, behind the rhetoric, cracks appear. Russian diplomats in Washington and Brussels push for quiet talks, hinting at de-escalation channels that contradict the public fury. Ukrainian President Zelensky, addressing the nation from a secure bunker, counters with measured defiance. These operations target only military assets, he insists, framing them as legitimate self-defense after months of Russian bombardments on Ukrainian soil. European leaders react swiftly. The German Chancellor urges restraint on both sides, while French officials echo calls for a ceasefire, their words laced with unease over NATO's indirect involvement through supplied weaponry. But this is only part of the picture. In Beijing, quiet support for Moscow surfaces through state media, praising Russia's resilience without outright endorsement, a nod to their strategic partnership amid global tensions. The contradiction deepens. Putin's inner circle leaks hints of internal discord, with oligarchs reportedly pressuring for negotiations to safeguard their assets, even as state television amplifies narratives of unity. Official denials flood the airwaves. No civilian casualties, they claim, despite unverified reports suggesting otherwise, creating a chasm between proclaimed invincibility and the reality of breached defenses. Washington's response is telling. The White House issues a vague statement on monitoring the situation closely, avoiding direct blame, while intelligence briefings to Congress highlight Ukraine's growing autonomy in strike decisions, free from prior U.S. vetoes. Here's where it gets intriguing. Putin's panic manifests in hurried alliances. Envoys reach out to Tehran for additional air defenses, promising economic incentives in return, a move that underscores the Kremlin's isolation. Domestically, the Duma rushes through resolutions bolstering emergency powers, granting broader surveillance to quell potential unrest, yet opposition voices in exile decry it as a power grab disguised as patriotism. The Polish government, on Ukraine's border, mobilizes border forces and demands transparency from NATO allies, fearing spillover into a broader European crisis. In these contradictions, bold threats paired with backroom pleas, lies the political unraveling. Government's posture for the cameras, but actions reveal desperation. Ankar's President Erdogan plays both sides, offering mediation while quietly supplying drones to Ukraine, exploiting the chaos for regional leverage. However, beneath this diplomatic dance, deeper fissures emerge. The European Union convenes an extraordinary summit, with leaders from 27 nations debating aid packages that could tip the scales. An extra €50 billion floated for reconstruction if peace talks advance, a carrot dangling amid the sticks of frozen Russian assets worth hundreds of billions. Putin's administration, in a stark contrast, accelerates ties with North Korea, securing missile technology exchanges that alarm Seoul and Tokyo, who respond with joint military drills involving thousands of troops. The official line from Moscow remains unyielding. Sovereignty is non-negotiable, yet satellite imagery, as analyzed by independent think tanks, shows unusual troop redeployments away from the front lines, suggesting a diversion of resources to protect the homeland. And now, the most revealing layer: international reactions expose the hypocrisy. India's neutral stance wavers as trade delegations pause deals with Russia valued at tens of billions annually, prioritizing energy security over ideology. In Brasilia, Brazilian officials call for multilateral dialogue, but privately, they eye opportunities in the disrupted grain markets, where Ukrainian exports, once feeding 80 million people worldwide, now face indefinite halts. Putin's panic fuels erratic diplomacy. A sudden overture to the African Union promises debt relief for votes against Ukraine in global forums, a tactic reminiscent of Cold War maneuvers. Yet, the core contradiction persists. Declarations of strength mask a regime on the brink, where every ally's hesitation amplifies the isolation. As parliaments across the globe debate resolutions, some condemning the strikes, others the provocations, the political arena turns into a hall of mirrors, reflecting not unity, but a world divided by self-interest. This political theater sets the stage for what comes next, but remember, to stay ahead of these shifting alliances and not miss the critical updates, hit that subscribe button right now. It's your link to the unfolding truth. The facades are cracking, and the real power plays are just beginning to show. Russian air defenses scramble into overdrive across the capital and the northern city, intercepting dozens of incoming drones in a frantic ballet of missiles lighting up the pre-dawn sky, but not before several break through, slamming into rail yards and fuel depots with precision that exposes glaring vulnerabilities. Ukrainian special forces, coordinating from hidden bases near the border, launch wave after wave, over 50 aerial vehicles in the first hour alone, each carrying payloads designed to disrupt supply lines feeding the front, turning the heartland into a sudden battlefield. Putin's command center erupts in urgency, generals bark orders for immediate reinforcements, pulling battalions from distant outposts, 2,000 troops redirected within minutes, to fortify the skies over Moscow, where anti-aircraft batteries now hum at full alert, scanning for the next assault. The rhythm quickens, explosions rock the outskirts, secondary blasts from ignited munitions sending plumes rising hundreds of feet, as Ukrainian operatives claim hits on 3 major logistics centers, crippling transport for armored divisions that once numbered in the thousands. Russian fighter jets roar overhead, scrambling 20 squadrons to patrol the airspace, their afterburners trailing fire as they hunt the elusive threats, but reports filter in of at least 7 drones evading the net, striking power grids that flicker out across industrial zones, leaving thousands in blackout amid the chaos. This isn't random fire, it's calculated retaliation. Kiev's arsenal, bolstered by Western tech, pierces deep, over 500 miles from the conflict zone, forcing Putin to confront the nightmare of homefront war. Tension builds, Kremlin alerts escalate to full mobilization, activating reserve units totaling 15,000 personnel in the European sector, their trucks thundering toward checkpoints as civilians huddle in shelters, the air thick with the whine of incoming alerts. Ukrainian commanders, in a masterstroke, time the barrage to coincide with a shifting wind pattern, maximizing dispersal of any chemical markers to confuse radar, while their ground teams monitor real-time feeds, adjusting trajectories mid-flight for maximum impact on ammo caches stocked with tens of thousands of rounds. Russian countermeasures falter under the onslaught. Surface-to-air systems, once touted as impenetrable, register a hit rate below 80%, with debris raining down on suburbs, igniting fires that crews battle with hundreds of vehicles racing to the scene. And here the drama surges. Putin's inner military circle debates counterstrikes, greenlighting missile volleys toward Ukrainian launch sites, over 30 launches in retaliation that streak across the night, targeting airfields where drone fleets assemble, each carrying warheads potent enough to level hangars housing scores of aircraft. The front lines ignite in sympathy. Russian artillery pounds border positions with barrages exceeding 1,000 shells per hour, while Ukrainian defenders dig in, their anti-tank teams, armed with systems piercing 3 layers of armor, hold firm, repelling advances that push forward only a few hundred yards amid the mud and smoke. Eyewitnesses from the ground describe the frenzy, pilots ejecting from downed jets, paratroopers dropping into contested zones to secure perimeters, the clash claiming dozens on both sides in the opening salvos. Pace accelerates further. Intelligence leaks reveal Ukrainian hackers infiltrating Russian command networks, delaying response times by crucial minutes, allowing additional waves of 10 drones to slip past, zeroing in on naval facilities in the northern port where submarines moor, their hulls vulnerable to the precision strikes that could sideline a fleet of 8 vessels. Putin's panic translates to desperate orders: activate electronic warfare units, jamming signals over a radius of 50 miles, but the disruption backfires, blinding their own radars momentarily and letting 2 more intruders through, detonating near command posts where officers scramble for cover. The military machine grinds. Convoys of armored personnel carriers, numbering over 200, rush to evacuate key sites, while special ops teams infiltrate shadows to hunt saboteurs, their night vision scopes sweeping urban sprawl turned hostile. The stakes skyrocket. Russian naval forces in the Baltic mobilize, deploying corvettes armed with cruise missiles capable of reaching 200 miles, positioning for a blockade that could choke Ukrainian sea access, but Ukrainian naval drones counter with swarms of 15 units, harassing patrols and forcing retreats. Ground forces clash in escalating skirmishes, infantry assaults involving 500 soldiers per wave crash against fortified lines, machine guns chattering in bursts that echo for miles, as medevac helicopters ferry the wounded, scores already tallied in the fog of war. Putin's high command, sensing the breach's depth, diverts air assets from the southern theater, reallocating 30 fighters to the north, their sorties pounding suspected launch areas with cluster munitions that scatter over wide swaths, intensifying the cycle of retaliation. Drama peaks, deep within bunkers, strategists plot asymmetric responses, unleashing cyber units to target Ukrainian power infrastructure, blacking out grids serving millions, while physical strikes continue unabated, with Russian hypersonics, traveling at speeds exceeding 5 times sound, raining down on depots storing fuel for thousands of vehicles. The human toll mounts, field hospitals overflow with casualties from the aerial duels, surgeons operating under generators as the night pulses with urgency. Ukrainian resilience shines. Their air force, though outnumbered 10-1, employs decoy tactics, drawing fire and preserving core assets for follow-up barrages that could number in the hundreds if unchecked. In this whirlwind of steel and fire, the military frontier blurs. Putin's forces, stretched across a 1,000-mile front, now defend their core, reallocating resources that weaken peripheral holds, allowing Ukrainian advances elsewhere by several kilometers. The onslaught reveals fractures, conscripts, many untrained beyond basic drills, falter under pressure, desertion whispers amid the ranks as the reality of strikes on home soil sinks in. Counterintelligence sweeps arrest suspected infiltrators, over 20 detained in the capital alone, while border patrols tighten, scanning for the special units that slipped through, their mission sowing discord with timed explosives. The tempo holds relentless. A satellite overwatch confirms the strike's reach, damaging infrastructure vital to sustaining an army of 300,000, forcing rationing of supplies that could last only weeks under siege. Putin's voice crackles over secure lines, demanding accountability from defense chiefs, the blame game fueling internal rifts as admirals and generals vie for control. Ukrainian tacticians, monitoring the chaos, prepare Phase 2, ground incursions probing weakened flanks, infantry squads of 50 pushing forward under drone cover, clashing in firefights that claim lives by the dozen. As the military storm rages, subscribe to this channel now so you don't miss the raw details of these maneuvers and the next explosive developments. It's unfolding faster than anyone predicted. The front has come home, and the counterpunch is loading. Global markets convulse in the wake of these strikes, with oil prices surging 20% overnight as traders in London and New York scramble to price in disruptions to Russian pipelines snaking through the heartland, potentially idling refineries that process millions of barrels daily and sending energy costs spiraling for households across Europe, where households already strained by prior hikes face bills doubling in the coming months. The ruble plummets 15% against the dollar in frantic trading sessions, wiping out trillions in value from Moscow Stock Exchange, where shares in energy giants tumble 30 points, forcing central bankers to inject hundreds of billions into the system to stem the bleed, yet investor flight accelerates, with foreign funds pulling out over 50 billion in assets amid fears of broader sanctions that could freeze another 200 billion in reserves. In Beijing, officials voice deep concern over supply chain fractures, as these hits threaten grain shipments vital to feeding 1.4 billion people, prompting emergency stockpiling that strains global food reserves already thin from the ongoing conflict. The scale widens. European allies in Brussels demand immediate clarifications from both sides, with the European Commission fast-tracking a relief package worth €100 billion to buffer Ukraine's economy against retaliatory blows, while quietly rerouting liquefied natural gas imports from Qatar to offset the loss of Russian volumes equaling 40% of continental needs, a shift that inflates shipping costs by 25% and squeezes manufacturers in Germany, where factories idle thousands of workers as raw material prices climb. Washington monitors the fallout closely, the Treasury signaling readiness to expand sanctions on Russian banks, targeting entities handling transactions worth trillions annually, which could cascade into a credit crunch crippling exporters from Siberia to the Urals, where mining operations halt, idling equipment valued at tens of billions and laying off scores of miners in remote outposts. Geopolitical tremors propagate. Ankara's leadership, balancing ties with both powers, halts mediation talks while eyeing gains in Black Sea trade routes disrupted by the chaos, potentially capturing market share in wheat exports that once dominated 80% of regional flows, boosting their economy by several billion but inflaming tensions with neighbors wary of the power vacuum. In New Delhi, policymakers express alarm at the volatility, pausing joint ventures with Moscow valued at $15 billion in defense tech, redirecting investments toward diversified suppliers to safeguard their growth trajectory averaging 7% yearly, yet the ripple hits hard, with fertilizer imports from Russia, key to feeding 200 million farmers, facing delays that could slash crop yields by 10% across the subcontinent. However, the cold calculus deepens. Putin's inner economic advisors huddle in fortified sessions, plotting countermeasures like dumping state gold reserves totaling 2,000 tons to prop up the currency, a desperate gambit that floods markets and depresses prices globally, undercutting jewelers in Mumbai and tech firms in Silicon Valley reliant on stable commodities. The International Monetary Fund warns of contagion, projecting a global growth shave of 2 points if the strikes escalate, with emerging markets in Latin America bearing the brunt as commodity prices for metals like nickel, sourced from Russian mines producing half the world's supply, jump 40%, forcing automakers in Brazil to halt production lines churning out thousands of vehicles weekly. Paris and Berlin coordinate responses, imposing tariffs on non-essential Russian imports worth $30 billion, aiming to starve the war machine but inadvertently hiking costs for consumers in the Eurozone by 15% on everything from steel to software. International reactions layer on. Seoul and Tokyo, already jittery, launched joint economic drills simulating supply disruptions, bolstering stockpiles of semiconductors critical to their trillion-dollar industries, while quietly boosting aid to Kyiv by $5 billion in low-interest loans to fortify its resilience against the economic siege. In Brasilia, leaders call for calm in multilateral forums but position to fill voids in soybean markets vacated by Ukrainian disruptions, eyeing gains of $20 billion in exports that could stabilize their currency amid the storm. The African Union, courted by Moscow with debt forgiveness packages totaling $10 billion, wavers in support, as strikes imperil fertilizer aid that sustains agriculture for $600 million, prompting shifts toward Western partnerships that promise infrastructure investments exceeding $50 billion over the next decade. The breadth of impact crystallizes, energy alliances fracture, with OPEC nations in the Gulf debating production hikes of 2 million barrels daily to cap the price spike, yet internal divisions stall decisions, leaving refiners in Houston scrambling for alternatives and driving up gasoline prices by 30 cents per gallon at pumps nationwide. Russian oligarchs, their yachts docked in Monaco, lobby discreetly for de-escalation, their fortunes, tied to conglomerates worth hundreds of billions, evaporating as Western banks freeze accounts holding tens of billions, accelerating capital flight that drains the economy of vital liquidity. Kyiv's finance ministry, undeterred, secures bridge financing from allies totaling $25 billion, earmarked for rebuilding struck infrastructure and sustaining a GDP contraction projected at 5% without intervention, turning the geopolitical chessboard into a high-stakes economic arena where every move reshapes alliances. Scale intensifies, the strikes expose dependencies, with Europe's wind farms and solar arrays, generating 30% of power, facing component shortages from disrupted Russian rare earth supplies, essential for magnets in turbines producing gigawatts for millions. In the Middle East, Riyadh weighs overtures to Moscow for discounted oil swaps valued at $40 billion, hedging against the uncertainty, while Tehran accelerates nuclear talks with indirect U.S. channels, leveraging the chaos to ease sanctions that have choked their oil revenues to under $10 billion annually. Global shipping lanes tense, with insurers hiking premiums by 50% on routes skirting the conflict zone, delaying cargoes that feed factories across Asia, where assembly lines for electronics, outputting billions of units, grind slower, rippling unemployment to hundreds of thousands. The geopolitical web tightens, Putin's pivot to BRICS partners yields mixed results. Brasilia and Pretoria commit to trade pacts bypassing the dollar, aiming for volumes of $100 billion in alternative currencies, but Beijing's caution tempers enthusiasm, prioritizing stability in their $2 trillion bilateral trade with the West. The World Trade Organization convenes virtually, debating dispute panels over the disruptions, with members from 50 nations pushing resolutions that could impose penalties exceeding $20 billion on aggressors, further isolating Moscow's economy already sanctioned to the tune of $300 billion in lost revenues since the war's onset. Ukrainian ports, though battered, see a surge in Western shipments, grain corridors protected by naval escorts carrying millions of tons, bolstering food security for allies in North Africa, where famines loom without the influx feeding 80 million. In this vast economic theater, the strikes rewrite the rules. Futures markets in Chicago bet on prolonged volatility, with wheat contracts soaring 25% as Ukrainian silos, indirectly affected, withhold exports that once stabilized prices for billions worldwide. Putin's regime, cornered, rations domestic fuel allocations, prioritizing military needs over civilian transport that moves millions daily, sparking black market surges where prices triple for essentials. The cold scope reveals it all, no corner untouched, from Wall Street boardrooms to rural co-ops in the global south, where the fallout compounds inequalities, widening the chasm between haves and have-nots in a world economy teetering on the edge. As these ripples spread across borders and balance sheets, subscribe to stay locked in on the financial shifts and alliance realignments that follow. The global order hangs in the balance, and the aftershocks are just gaining momentum. In the quiet after the blasts, minds across the world grapple with the shadow of this moment, where the inviolable core of a superpower crumbles under assault, forcing every citizen from Kiev's resilient streets to Moscow's stunned boulevards to question the fragility of the walls they've long trusted. Putin's regime, once a monolith of control, now faces the psychological fracture, millions tuning into state broadcasts for reassurance, yet whispers of doubt spread like cracks in ice, eroding the narrative of untouchable strength that has held sway for decades, leaving ordinary Russians to confront the terror of war's reach into their homes, where families huddle in dimmed rooms, hearts pounding with the realization that no distance shields them anymore. This isn't mere fear, it's a collective unraveling, where propaganda clashes with the raw sight of smoke over landmarks, planting seeds of unrest that could swell into protests numbering in the tens of thousands if the panic deepens, turning loyalty into quiet rebellion. The depth sinks in. What does this mean for the human spirit in endless conflict, where Ukrainian fighters, driven by years of loss, strike not from rage alone but from a profound resolve to reclaim agency, their psyches forged in the fires of survival, now projecting defiance that echoes through global consciousness, inspiring allies from Warsaw to Washington to redouble support, while sowing unease in neutral capitals like New Delhi, where leaders ponder if their own borders could one day face similar incursions. Philosophically, this piercing of the veil exposes the illusion of security in our interconnected age. Borders, once sacred lines, dissolve into permeable zones where drones carry the weight of national traumas, compelling societies to reckon with the cost of aggression, Russia's isolation amplifying internal paranoia, with surveillance tightening on millions, breeding a culture of suspicion that stifles the very unity it seeks to enforce. Pause here, in the philosophical hush. What is the true toll on the soul of a nation under siege, where Putin's inner circle wrestles with the erosion of morale among troops totaling hundreds of thousands, their confidence shattered by the homefront breach, leading to hesitations on the battlefield that could cost lives by the score, as the psychological strain manifests in delayed orders and fractured chains of command? For the world watching, this event marks a pivot in the human narrative of power. Empires built on fear now tremble under the gaze of the vulnerable, reminding us that every escalation chips away at the global psyche, fostering a widespread anxiety that grips leaders in Brussels, where debates rage over the moral imperative to intervene, weighing the humanitarian crisis against the specter of wider war that could engulf continents. The question lingers, profound and pressing: how does this redefine our place in history, where ordinary people from St. Petersburg's cafes to Ukraine's frontlines become unwilling actors in a drama of existential stakes, their mental fortitude tested as images of destruction flood screens, evoking a shared dread that unites in empathy yet divides in blame, with social media amplifying voices of despair reaching billions, turning personal anguish into a viral undercurrent that pressures governments to act or face domestic backlash from crowds swelling to millions in virtual and physical squares. In this pause, the philosophical core emerges. War's true weapon lies not in steel but in the shattering of illusions, where Russia's vaunted resilience gives way to collective trauma, potentially fracturing alliances as citizens abroad, exiles numbering in the hundreds of thousands, amplify calls for change, their stories humanizing the abstract, forcing the international community to confront complicity in the prolongation of suffering. Yet, beneath the introspection, the human element persists. What will this do to the next generation, scarred by the knowledge that safety is a myth, their worldviews shaped by these hours of vulnerability, where Ukrainian youth, enduring blackouts and alerts, cultivate a steely optimism drawn from cultural roots, while in Moscow, a generation raised on triumphs now navigates disillusionment, their trust in authority waning as economic hardships compound the mental load, leading to a societal shift that could redefine national identity for decades. Globally, the ripple touches philosophers and pundits alike, debating the ethics of retaliation in an era of asymmetric threats, where the psychological victory of breaching the heartland empowers the underdog, yet invites a cycle of vengeance that poisons minds across borders, from the halls of the United Nations to remote villages, instilling a pervasive wariness that alters daily lives for billions. This reckoning extends to us all. What meaning do we draw from a conflict that blurs the lines between aggressor and defender, where the strikes symbolize not just tactical gains but a philosophical assertion of sovereignty, challenging the world to choose sides in the battle for human dignity. As fatigue sets in after years of headlines, yet this moment reignites urgency, compelling viewers to reflect on their own vulnerabilities in a volatile globe. Putin's panic, mirrored in the eyes of his people, underscores the hubris of endless war, a reminder that psychological endurance has limits, potentially tipping regimes toward collapse if the internal narrative unravels further, with dissenters emerging from the shadows to voice the unspoken fears shared by millions. In the end, this is the heart of it. What does it mean for our shared future, where such events etch themselves into the collective memory, fostering a cautious wisdom or, conversely, hardening resolves that prolong the strife, leaving historians to chronicle how a single night's audacity shifted paradigms, influencing policies from energy independence drives affecting hundreds of millions to peace initiatives that could heal divides or widen them. The pause invites contemplation. In the face of such upheaval, resilience becomes the ultimate currency, tested not by bombs but by the will to envision peace amid the ruins. And as we absorb this weight, subscribe to the channel right now to not miss the profound insights and developments that will shape what comes next, because in these reflective moments, the real story of humanity's path forward truly begins. Everything is only just starting.